Now, we will just simply, in a very quick manner, go through our contrast by way of the tabernacle and the temple. You remember these are two specific names referring to two separate buildings. But in actuality, they're built or constructed for the same purpose, and that is so that God might have a house, and both of them are called a house, that God might have a place to dwell in. And these things are both designated as his dwelling place amongst Israel. The tabernacle we looked at, and it said Moses made it. The temple we looked at, and Solomon is associated with the first temple. The tabernacle was made of linen and animals' hair and skins, whereas the temple is made of wood and stone. Now, it's not that there are not some of these other things like linen and curtains and veils and that in the temple, but we're talking about the bulk of the building material. And as you see here, you have the tabernacle as it is set up. And one of the reasons I like this graphic is, and someone commented, is that the way that it was? Yes, when God was at home in his house, the Shekinah glory column went up from the holy place. And this is significant because this is going to be called his presence. We'll see that in a moment. And it was only when God's presence was in the Holy of Holies was the high priest allowed to come in there in a face-to-face type relationship. Okay, the second building then, as we noted it, had the very similar things with regard to the format of it, and we'll look at the floor plan in just one second. But both of these buildings are important, but this building is perhaps more important because God is said to dwell at a specific point. His decreed place has foundations, and they're set in the earth, and those foundations are for his house. And the tabernacle was to move about, and it was used for 487 years. After that, God discarded the tabernacle in favor of the temple. And it's an interesting point as to what happened to the tabernacle. It was brought into the temple, and because it could be folded up and disassembled and that sort of thing, they brought it up from Shiloh. Shiloh is an important place that we'll learn about in just a little bit. And they stored it in this massive, magnificent structure called the temple. Now, we're going to look then at this guy, and we had some comments from the peanut gallery as to the fact that he looked like a chef and that the breastplate looked like a calculator that we have seen on the market. And in fact, it does. But in actuality, what we're looking at, we're not studying the high priest. We're studying one thing about the high priest, and that was he had interspersed between several colors of pomegranates, he had a golden bell there. And that bell was important for two reasons. One, it announced his presence when he was coming into the very periphery of God. If he didn't have those bells on and he came into the Holy of Holies, he would have been killed immediately. But these bells announced his coming. Now, once he was in there, if he did something that was not acceptable, he died. And so therefore the other priest tied a rope around his ankle, and if at any time they couldn't hear those bells ringing, and we were commenting downstairs, if it was me, those bells would have been shaking all the time because please God, have been like the scarecrow and the cowardly lion before Oz. They'd have been ringing to beat the band. But if they didn't hear the bells, the only way they had of getting him out of there was to pull him with that rope. And they had to pull him quite a distance because really no one else was supposed to be in this general area when he was in there on the Day of Atonement. And so they would have to pull him that distance out to where they could get his dead body. Now, as far as I know, God did not kill anybody in the Holy of Holies. However, we had mentioned in one of the portions that we read, God did kill 2 priests in the holy place. They were sons of Aaron that offered strange fire on the altar of incense. Their names were Nadab and Abihu. And the type incense was to be made according to a prescription. And if you offered something that God smelled that was foreign to what he had prescribed, those priests died, and they did die instantly. And that's how we know that the high priest went into the presence of God with fear and trepidation and caution, because you could die real quick. Now, what we want to do, and we brought you to this point, and we're going to not have a whole lot of review, simply because we've got a lot to look at. And we're here in Leviticus chapter 16. And our study is this: how come only one person is allowed in the Holy of Holies once a year, and that's the high priest? How come we find throughout history the fact that others came in there, others who were Gentiles, and didn't experience the immediate judgment of God? And there's a reason for that. But verse number 2 specifies, the Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron your brother, he was the high priest, that he in that office come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. Now, the reason is, for I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. Now, let's look at what this cloud was called. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 33. Exodus chapter 33. In Exodus 33, there is going to be a specific reason why he couldn't just go in there at all times, just this one time. But when he did go in there, God said, I will be in there. I will come on the mercy seat just like this is. Now here we are in Exodus 33, and we'll begin with verse number 12. Moses said to the Lord, see, thou sayest unto me, bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and have found grace. Now therefore, I pray, if I found grace, show me now thy way, that I might know, that I might find grace in your sight. Now verse 14 is the key. My presence shall go with thee. That's what this was called. Whether it was the star or the column, or a column of fire, or column of cloud, or a cloud in the sky, that indicated the presence. That's the significance, by the way, of the Star of Bethlehem. It's because inside of this cloud, Jesus Christ lived. That's where he was. The cloud simply was a facade to protect him from familiarity. But the significance of that Shekinah glory that led the wise men was that he was no longer in the Shekinah star. He was that little baby in the manger. And that indicated his presence. It was his star. It was where he lived. And so that's the key phrase there, my presence shall go with thee. And so Moses said, I want to know it. Verse 18, I beseech thee, therefore, show me thy glory. Now, this cloud or this fire concealed what was on the inside. And it was called glory, and this should be translated, show me what your glory conceals. And so there's the whole thing here where it says, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, verse 19, and you can't see my face and live, verse 20. But the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me, you'll stand in a rock. And it'll come to pass that while my glory passes by, that I'll put thee in the cleft of the rock and cover thee with my hand. And I will take away my hand, and you'll see my back parts, but not my face. So here is the glory, and here was the presence. But the two were simultaneous. The glory simply hid his presence. And so Moses actually was allowed inside of this. But the significance is that's God's presence. That's where God lived. All right. Let's go, therefore, to chapter 29 of Exodus. Chapter 29 and verse number 43. For there, the tabernacle and the temple, of course, I'll meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. This is when the high priest was to go in, when God's glory was there, which indicated that his personal presence was there. And I will sanctify the tabernacle of the congregation. I will sanctify Aaron to do the work, and I will dwell, verse 45, among the children of Israel, and they'll know that I'm their God, last part of verse 46, that I might dwell among them. So, here we go then. Let's look at two instances where God initially sanctified both the tabernacle and the temple with his presence. Come to chapter 40 in this book, and we'll look at the tabernacle. Chapter 40, last part of verse 33. So Moses finished the work of constructing and setting up the tabernacle. Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of the congregation because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up over the tabernacle, the children of Israel moved onward in their journeys. But if the cloud were not taken up, then they journeyed not until the day it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night in the sight of all the house of Israel. So here is the significance then. God came down and said, I'm going to sanctify this entire thing. He came to his house, and it spilled over so that everybody in there had to clear out. All right, let's look at the temple then. Very same thing. 1 Kings. First Kings chapter 8. And verse number 10. Now remember, it's in the Holy of Holies as to where he came down. And it came to pass, when the priests were come out of the holy place, this is at the dedication, the initial service. What we just read was the dedication of the tabernacle. Its first official use. God came down, filled the place, everybody scattered. Now it's the first official use of the temple. Solomon just finished constructing it. It's 487 years after the tabernacle was built. And so it says, it came to pass when the priests were come out of the holy place. Remember, they had to bring the Ark of the Covenant up and all the utensils of the tabernacle into the temple, and they put the Ark of the Covenant in its place. They no sooner did that, it says, they came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord had filled the house. All right. Now let's go from this point then to begin showing our objective in when Israel, or when others were allowed in the holy place, the Holy of Holies. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 4. The thing that we need to realize is when God's presence was there, he looked favorably upon Israel and or the tabernacle or temple, depending on the case. Now we're going to look at a case in point with the tabernacle that becomes the precedent for the temple. Because if God departs from the tabernacle or temple in anger, if he forsakes them, if he abandons it, and it's called making it desolate, then he doesn't care what happens to it. Anybody can go in there. It becomes part of Israel's vain religious system, and the building is meaningless. So what? God's not there. The whole purpose was for him to dwell there. If he's not there anymore, it means that he has forsaken it. Now, this is a classic case here in 1 Samuel 4, verse 1. The word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle. And verse 2, the Philistines put themselves in array and joined the battle, and Israel was smitten before the Philistines. And when they were come to the camp, verse 3, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us this day before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant out of the Lord out of Shiloh. Now you remember, Shiloh is where it finally was set up. For 40 years it went through the wilderness. The second generation crossed Jordan near Jericho and set it up in a place called Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle stayed for hundreds of years until the temple was finally built. Then it was disassembled and taken to the temple with all of the furnishings, including the ark. When the ark went into the Holy of Holies, that's when the presence of God came down. But in verse 3, do you find anywhere where God himself said to anyone, get the ark out of the tabernacle and take it to battle? There's no place where God commanded them. They were not supposed to do this. Let's fetch the ark, they said, out of Shiloh. When it cometh among us, it might save us out of the hand of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, took the ark of God. Now they were priests. Eli was the high priest, but his two sons were mere priests. They went into the Holy of Holies and took the ark of the covenant out of there at the beckoning of the elders of Israel and the soldiers. So when the ark of the covenant, verse 5 of the Lord, came to the camp, all Israel shouted. The Philistines heard the noise of the shout. What does it mean? And they understood the ark of the Lord was come to the camp, and they were afraid. But now, woe unto us. They began whining, oh, these are the gods that smote the Egyptians and so forth. And finally, somebody said, ye Philistines, we don't want to be the servants to the Hebrews. Quit yourselves like men and fight. And so the Philistines fought it. You see, it reversed. God never told Israel to take that ark out of the tabernacle, but they did so. Now watch what happens. The Philistines fought. Israel was smitten, and they fled every man to his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken. Who took the ark? The Philistines. Now, remember this morning we said if anybody but the priest designated touched the ark, what would happen to them? They were killed. Were the Philistines, the enemies of Israel, killed? They were not. Why? Because God abandoned the ark of the covenant and God abandoned the tabernacle for Israel's disobedience. So there came a man of Benjamin out of the army and came to Shiloh. This is where Eli, the high priest, was. He rent his clothes and he said what had happened and how that the ark had been taken and the two sons were dead. Come on down to verse 17. The messenger answered, Israel has fled before the Philistines. There's been a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons, the priest, regular priest, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark is taken. the Ark of the Covenant, where God said, as long as you worship me and do what I say, there's no enemy that will stand before you. You'll conquer them all. Now, all of a sudden, that very instrument, so very important, was in the hands of the Philistines, the sworn enemies of Israel. And nothing happened. And it came to pass when he made mention of the ark that Eli fell backwards from his seat and broke his neck and died. But now here's the important thing, verse 19. At the same time, his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. She heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and her father-in-law was dead. And she bowed herself and travailed, and pains came upon her at the time of her death. Now she was giving birth to this son. And the woman by her, the midwife, said, "Fear not, for you've borne a son." And she answered not, neither did she regard it. And her final words were these: "Name the child Ichabod." Now, Ichabod Crane is of that story of the headless horseman. Yeah, that's you telling around Halloween and the like. She named her son Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed." Now, what was the glory? The outer protective barrier that kept the presence safe from any intrusion. It was the indicator that the presence of God was with Israel in the tabernacle or temple. Ichabod means the glory, the presence of God has departed from that building. It's gone. And the enemies of God have the ark and the building. These things now become meaningless. So what? So what? There's a tabernacle if God's not there. So what? There's an ark of the covenant if the enemies of God have it. So what? If Israel's not going to obey, God has the right to abandon that system, and he did. So it says, the glory has departed from Israel because the ark of God was taken. And she said, verse 22, the glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. Now, how do you name your children? Well, the glory is departed. So she called him Ichabod. And that was a term of derision because Israel was now in dire straits. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the temple. Let's go to the book of Psalms, chapter 78. Psalm 78. Now, whether it's T1 or T2, the tabernacle or the temple, God is going to now use Shiloh as a precedent. Psalm 78, and we'll start here with verse number 56. He took them out of Egypt, the psalm says. He brought them into the land, verse 56. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. For they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. They adopted the gods and religious systems of the roundabout, yet they still kept the tabernacle or the temple, in this case the T1. When God heard this, he was wroth and greatly abhorred Israel. And here's the key. So he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh. He forsook it. He said, it's not my house anymore because they're not my people anymore. They broke the covenant, and what is the agreement? If ye will, I will. If you won't, I ain't going to either. And so they didn't, and God didn't. And so the temple or the tabernacle are meaningless buildings unless God's presence is there and sanctions what goes on. And so he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hands. Get that? His presence is gone. And everything about this that brought God down to earth to live among men and Israel now is rejected, and he left and he abandoned the place. Now let's go back to 1 Kings 9. 1 Kings 9. Now, in chapter 8, we have where the original temple of Solomon was dedicated. And Solomon did most of the speaking in chapter 8. But in chapter 9, God appears to Solomon and says, okay, now I have something to say here. And so we'll begin reading with verse number 2. Where am I? 9. So the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time. And he said to him, verse 3, I've heard your prayer and supplication that you have made before me, and I have hallowed this house. How did Solomon know that God hallowed the house, sanctified it? I will sanctify it by my presence. What is his presence? He comes down into the Holy of Holies, and the people see the glory. He did it with the tabernacle, he did it at the temple, but when the glory was gone, when the presence was gone, it meant the house wasn't sanctified anymore. So he said, I've hallowed this building which thou hast built, to put my name there forever. And of course, this is the significance of the temple over the tabernacle. The tabernacle was never meant to be a perpetual place where God would have his name. It was to be on a permanent building, edifice, and that was the temple. And so he goes on to say, if you'll walk with me, these are things between him and Solomon. David, verse 5, last part, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But just to by the by here, did Solomon's line fail to produce a man for the throne of Israel? Remember the Coniah curse? That was a grandson of Solomon. And therefore you had to come back to the son of Nathan through Mary rather than the line of Solomon through Joseph. Okay. But here is what we want to get to. Verse 6, if ye shall at all turn from following me. Remember, we're under law. We're under covenant contract. If ye shall turn from following me, ye or your children, and don't keep my commandments and my statutes, which I've set before you to serve other gods, then I will cut off Israel out of the land which I have given. And now note this key. And this house, which I have hallowed for my name, will I cast out of my sight. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. Now, these words are the same as if we go back to Leviticus 26. Now, if I have to have a part 3 and 4 in this, I'm going to do it because I'm just not going to rush through it to get 2 parts. I thought we could, but I chased too many rabbits. But sometimes there are things that I think and we need to point out as we go so that you get the gist of it. Okay? Let's go to Leviticus 26. And starting with verse 27. In this chapter, there are 5 multiplications of punishments during the course of their history. And involved in that is God's abandoning the temple or the tabernacle. Under covenant contract, verse 27, if you will not for all of this hearken to me, but walk contrary to me, I'll walk contrary to you in fury. and chasten you. Come down to verse 31. I will make your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. Now, what are the sanctuaries? Let me just put this graphic up here quickly. Whether it's the temple or the tabernacle, the court, the outer court here it's an inner court simply because it's encased in a larger outer court, but it still corresponds to the outer court of the tabernacle. That's called a sanctuary. All three places are called a sanctuary because they are roped off or cordoned off or walled off so that people can't get in there, and only certain others could do the work, the priest. So here's sanctuary 1, the outer court. Here's sanctuary 2, the holy place. Here's sanctuary 3, the holy of holies. And God, remember when God's presence came down, it filled the entire place. And it sanctified those buildings with his personal presence and glory. But know what it says. I'll make your sanctuaries desolation. I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. He will not smell the offerings of the brazen altar. He will not smell the incense of the high priest or the altar of incense. And that's what it means. He's not going to smell them because he's not going to be there. And then it says, I will bring the land to desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein. The enemies take over these buildings and their homes and their cities and their land. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. Now, it's in keeping with that context that we have people coming into the Holy of Holies. Now let's look at just a couple other things here for a moment. I'll put this on so it won't be so bright for you. Let's go to Jeremiah 7. Jeremiah 7. Now, there's two portions in Jeremiah that we want to read that pertains to this. And then, again, if our time does run out, we'll have another part to look historically at these things. And I think that's maybe what I might do, is go toward the history of this and then look at one other aspect here, maybe in a fourth part. And that is something that is more magnificent than these two buildings. You know that? There is something in existence that is more magnificent than the temple would ever think of being, or the tabernacle. You know what that is? It's a church, which is the body of Christ. Because it says, your body is the what? Temple. And in us, the Apostle Paul says that God has shined in us. And we have the glory in earthen vessels in us. And that's magnificent. The very presence of God came down in these buildings, and that's where he dwelt. Do you know where he's dwelling today? In the bodies of grace age believers. Now there, that is so. Now, granted, we may not be as valuable material-wise or architecturally valuable in all of the aesthetics and that sort of thing, but we are far more beautiful to God and significant in that where we are as the church on earth, that's where God dwells. That is fantastic. So, anyway, excuse me, I get a little excited. I didn't shout or anything, but verse 12. Actually, let's back up to verse 11. In the context here, he is given a reprimand. This is Jeremiah 7. To those who come to the temple of the Lord, but in verse 4, but they trust in lying words, and yet they say, we're going to go to the temple of the Lord. Now, they're worshiping other gods and that sort of thing, but when they get in trouble, boy, they know where to go. Back to the temple. Here we're going to the temple, So they're there, and here's what he says. Verse 10, and come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations. He said, you mean that's what you're going to do? You're really owning up to what you're doing. You're really going to repent of this? Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Now, do these words ring a bell? Did anybody else say them? Remember, Jesus Christ came in there and said, this house is a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of what? Thieves. That's what he was quoting right here. Now note the significance, because what did Jesus Christ do just before he was crucified? He abandoned the temple. Remember? He was in the temple and he said, I'm not coming back here anymore until you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. I'm abandoning it. So let's move on here. But go now unto my place, which was where? In Shiloh. Shiloh's the example. Shiloh's the illustration, which I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it and the wickedness of Israel. Go back to Shiloh and see for yourselves. Now, come with me to chapter 26. In Jeremiah. Verse 1. The beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. The word of the Lord came, saying, stand in the court of the Lord's house. Where is he? He is at the outer court there where we just showed. It was the first of the three sanctuaries. The entire thing was a sanctuary, but it had three compartments which had specific functions and duties and designations and purposes. So he comes here because he's looking into the Holy of Holies. Stand in the court of the Lord's house and speak to all the cities of Judah, which come to worship in the Lord's house. All these words that I command thee to speak unto them, diminish not a word. If so, they will hearken and turn every man from his evil way, that I may repent me of the evil which I purpose to do unto them, because of the evil of their doings. Thou shalt say to them, thus saith the Lord, if you will not hearken to me, to walk in my law, which I have set before you, to hearken to the words of my servants, the prophets, whom I've sent to you, rising up early, sending them, but have not hearkened. Note what he said he would do to the temple. Now remember, Shiloh, or the tabernacle, is what he abandoned at Shiloh. But Shiloh is the principle. If you'll not do it, then I will make this house like Shiloh, and I will make this city, Jerusalem, a curse to all the nations of the earth. And so time and again we find God saying, whether it's the tabernacle or the temple, if I abandon it, then I give it over to your enemies. Your enemies can walk in it, out, and around, do whatever they want to, and I'm not going to curse them because my presence is gone. It's not my house anymore. Now, let's just take a look at this as our time is about up. Daniel understood this. Daniel chapter 9. And we'll start with verse number 13. We could read the whole chapter, but we're just about out of time. And it's written in the law of Moses, all this evil has come upon us. Now, where in the law of Moses was this evil come upon him? Remember Leviticus 26? The cycles of discipline multiplied 7 times, where it said, I will finally forsake your sanctuaries and scatter you to the heathen. They were in Babylon for 70 years because God forsook Solomon's temple and had Nebuchadnezzar to destroy it and deport the people to Babylon. That's why they did it, and that's why this prayer. That we might turn from our iniquities and understand the truth. Therefore, as the Lord watched upon the evil that has been brought upon us, for the Lord our God is righteous, we obeyed not his voice. Last part of verse 14. But now, Lord, thou hast brought thy people forth out of the hand of Egypt with a mighty hand, but we have sinned and done wickedly. And the Lord did what he said he'd do in his anger. But let your anger and fury be turned from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because of our sins and for our iniquities. Now, note what it says in verse 17. Now therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications. Cause your face to shine upon what? Thy sanctuary. Now, where is he talking about? He's talking about the temple in Jerusalem that was destroyed, but he knows that there were predictions that if Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it, Cyrus would rebuild it after 70 years. Daniel understood that the 70 years were up. He got down on his knees and said, God, we now have a chance. Turn Israel, build that building again, and cause your face to shine back on that building. And why? Cause your face to shine upon the sanctuary that is desolate. How could Nebuchadnezzar come in there and take all the utensils and destroy the temple? Because God abandoned it. And Ezekiel gives us the exact way that God abandoned it. He went out through the eastern gate. The glory went out through the eastern gate, went up on the Mount of Olives, and went to heaven. By the way, when Jesus Christ left the temple for the last time, he went out the eastern gate and up on the Mount of Olives, and he taught up there. How is the glory going to be restored? Ezekiel says it comes down on the Mount of Olives and it comes through the eastern gate. How is Jesus Christ going to come to his temple? He's going to come down through the eastern gate. All right, let's look at two more and we're done. John chapter 2. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go let's go to Matthew 21. That'll save us some time. We'll look at John 2 later. Now, note what Christ says here, verse 13. He was casting out the money changers and so forth. He said unto them, it's written. Note the use of the personal possessive pronoun. My house shall be called the house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Now that's chapter 21. You come over to chapter 23. Verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone them which come to you. How oft I would have gathered you, but ye would not. Negative volition. Note what he now calls the temple. Behold, your house. It's no longer my house. It is now your house. Became part of Israel's vain religious system because it's left unto you desolate. So, it's with this in mind, when God is there, it's his house. Israel is in his favor. When God says, I'm not going to be there anymore, he says, it's your house. Do what you want to with it. I'm going to give it to your enemies. When Jesus said these words, about 30 years later, Titus, the Roman general, came and did what? To their house. He destroyed it. He went into it. He was not a priest. He was a Gentile. He went in and all of his uncircumcised soldiers went into this building and destroyed it, and there was no punitive action against them by God.